Eventually, in every healthy relationship, you're both going to unintentionally hurt or neglect one another. That's just a fact. Or if you won't admit that you've ever hurt your spouse, even unintentionally, you would at least agree that eventually someone is going to feel hurt in the relationship, aren't they? And I'm simply here to remind you that what you do in those moments, whether you feel hurt or neglected and you bring that up to your spouse, or when you're on the other side and your spouse says that they feel hurt because of something that you did, I'm just reminding you that your marriage lives or dies in those crucial moments. See, in a normal marriage, one spouse will eventually come to the other, either calm or frustrated, and say, listen, when you did X or when you didn't do X, it made me feel fill in the blank. Now, the problem is, even if someone says that in a non-blaming, non-critical way, most men will still take that as an attack. When most men hear their wives express a hurt or, God forbid, a complaint, they hear her saying, you're not good enough and you need to change. And in so many marriages, including my own, for years and years, when someone brought up a concern or a complaint, we made two huge mistakes. We either blamed them, we criticized them, we yelled, or we used passive aggressiveness in the hopes that our partner would somehow eventually hear us better or move in our direction, and that never worked. Or when a concern was brought up, we immediately launched into why they shouldn't feel that way, or why they're seeing it wrong, or why they're making too big of a deal of this, and it simply wasn't our fault that they're feeling that way. And that never worked either, did it? And I don't know about you, but we tended to get stuck in this toxic pattern where instead of accepting responsibility for our feelings, we blamed them. Instead of calmly expressing things, we attacked their character. You always, you never, you're so lazy, you don't care. And on the flip side, instead of listening, we made excuses. Instead of hearing them, we got defensive and we corrected their facts. Rarely did we ever actually explore what they were feeling. And I had a tendency to forget that if someone says that I hurt them, I don't get to decide that I didn't. And if we aren't careful and intentional, if we do what feels natural, if we react instead of respond, one person will always feel attacked, while the other person feels even more unheard and alone than before. And over time, I'm just warning you, having that same fight, getting stuck in that cycle, has catastrophic effects on your marriage. It erodes the intimacy and the vulnerability and the friendship and the trust. And as soon as those go, the marriage follows. Because let me tell you what's happening during all those fights, when you just go round and round with each other. When you dismiss their concerns or complaints as unimportant, when you immediately launch into defensiveness or excuses or dismissiveness, you're telling them that their perspective is wrong. Can you see that? You're certainly not elevating their perspective, right? You're certainly not considering their perspective, because when you consider someone else's perspective, you don't argue with it or mock them or roll your eyes. So don't fool yourself and think that you value their perspective because you haven't even given them time to explain it. You disagreed with it and dismissed it immediately. But you forgot that this isn't always about you. When you got married, you agreed to occasionally sit in the back seat and put the other person's needs above your own. That's what was in your vows, wasn't it? I promised to love you selflessly and cherish you, for better or worse, right? Well, for some of you, welcome to worse. And you're not the only one that's been there. But this is when your vows matter most, not when it's easy, but when it's hard. So do something different. Stop doing what's not working. Learn to actually honor them and value them and put their needs above your own. That's what makes a marriage great. And right now, she needs you to listen to her with curiosity instead of judgment. She needs to know that she's allowed to have feelings and hurts and that you won't punish her for them. She needs to know that she can rely on you for emotional safety. Because the moment that your partner doesn't feel safe to tell you what's on their heart, the moment your partner doesn't want to be vulnerable with you because you keep invalidating them or telling them why they shouldn't feel that way, or telling them that their feelings aren't your responsibility, the moment you start doing any of that, you're on a path to losing your marriage. Doesn't matter whether it's unintentional or not. You're now walking that path and it leads somewhere, whether you want it to or not. For most people, it leads to divorce. Marriages don't survive in those climates. Don't tell me that you love her if she feels chronically neglected or unheard or disrespected or hurt. Don't tell me that you value her if you're avoiding those conversations or if you're dismissing those complaints or concerns. That's not love. That's avoidance or pride or arrogance. So here's what I want you to do instead. I want you to imagine a world where after your spouse tells you something that's bothering them, even if it's something you did unintentionally that hurt them, and sure, you're angry and you feel attacked, but just imagine if for a moment you could just take a breath and say, tell me more about what made you feel that way. Men, we tend to be the worst at this. Do you know how many men want a marriage filled with more sex and less fighting? All of them. Do you know how many men actually know what it takes to reach that goal? Few of them. This is step one. It was like 6 years into my marriage until I realized that when my wife was upset about something, especially if it related to me, I didn't want her to elaborate, right? I didn't want her to explain why she felt the way she did. I didn't want to apologize for unintentionally hurting her. Because after all, she was wrong, and she needed to know that she was being unfair. I needed to remind her that I wasn't the bad guy, and she was simply making too big of a deal of this. Well, let me remind all of you, including myself, you can be right or you can be married. And when you win a fight, the marriage loses. The best thing that you can do in those moments when your spouse is upset about something, especially if it's a behavior of yours that made them feel neglected or hurt or rejected, the best thing that you can do is slow your fights way down. The best thing that you can do is respond instead of react. Do you know what asking those questions to better understand her hurt or perspective does? It says, you're valuable to me. It demonstrates you're more important than any fight that we might have. Does your spouse feel that way about you? Because do you know what makes the difference between marriages that eventually succeed versus ones that ultimately fail? Eventually, someone learns to take the focus off themselves and respond with curiosity. They learn to respond with kindness and empathy. They explore and seek to understand and validate their partner's perspective, whether they agree with it or not. And in doing so, they learn how to repair disconnections instead of make them worse. Because the moment that you show them that you're available to listen, the moment you show them that you value their perspective and you want to understand their feelings, the tension in the argument immediately goes down and they feel safe to share in a calm way. See, that doesn't make them want to fight more in the future. You'd be amazed at how the conflicts lessen and the complaints get less frequent when she actually feels heard and validated and understood and prioritized and valued. You'd be surprised at how a desire to be appreciative and affectionate and considerate and emotionally connected to her leads to less fighting and more sex. I heard sex. Oh, welcome back from your nap, man. I'm talking about in those heated moments, you can choose to let them speak, not hoping that they will eventually stop talking. The goal is not to not have conflict. You will have conflict in your marriage, but great marriages use conflict to grow deeper in love with each other. They use it to learn about their spouse. Are you learning about your spouse? In great marriages, they both learn about what each other needs to feel loved and appreciated and valued, and they do more of that. And they also learn about what makes each other feel neglected and hurt and emotionally disconnected, and they do less of that. They begin to actually listen for the hurt underneath each other's anger. They listen for the unmet need or desire for something underneath the complaint or frustration. That's what healthy people do. Is that what you do? Because that's not what I did. But you don't have to destroy your marriage like I did before you learn what it actually looks like to love someone else more than you love yourself. And next time you fight, next time you feel the urge to interrupt or make excuses or correct their facts, just say, it wasn't my intention to hurt you, and I'm sorry if I did. Can you tell me more about what led you to feel that way? Has your spouse ever heard that from you? Because that's what it looks like to value someone else's perspective. That's what it looks like to honor someone's experience. Men, we say that if something's important to her, it's important to us, right? But we've never thought to ask this. Why do you think that is? Because it's embarrassing. It's humbling, and no one told you that this is exactly what makes the difference between success or failure in your marriage. Well, I'm telling you, you of all people should be someone that your spouse feels safe to share whatever they're thinking or feeling. Wasn't that true on your wedding day? Didn't you have hopes to be someone that your spouse could tell what they're really feeling? I mean, didn't we all start out like that? I mean, my spouse and I were a team. It's us versus the world. We all started out that way, but in 50% of our marriages, probably far more, it's not us versus the world. It's us versus each other, isn't it? And why do you think that is? It's because it's easy to drift towards complacency and apathy in our marriage. It's so easy to drift towards emotional laziness and not be aware of it. It's easy to drift back into old patterns and habits of defensiveness or anger or fighting, isn't it? It's easy to forget that you don't know what you don't know, but what you don't know still hurts your spouse. and your marriage. It's easy to forget that divorce is preventable and predictable, and selfishness and pride and arrogance kill marriages every day. The only problem is nobody's guilty of them because they're all subjective. So how do we fight against those? How do we make sure that we aren't guilty of those without realizing it? We start with humility and self-awareness and transparency and selflessness. Start by inviting and encouraging her feelings into the discussion, not ignoring them or dismissing them or hoping that they'll go away. That never leads to the connection and the friendship and the intimacy that we all want in our marriages. We all have intentions of having a great marriage filled with either closeness or trust or passionate sex, but only certain paths lead to those destinations. Your intentions are meaningless. The only thing that matters is whether you're walking them or not. Because most people aren't, and most people end up divorced or in miserable marriages. But that doesn't have to be you. And I'm not asking you to change everything. I'm asking you to change one thing this week, and then another thing next week. And remember, it's always the little things that have the biggest impacts in your relationships. That's where trust is built and maintained in the small, consistent acts of kindness and affection and consideration. So just pick one thing right now. Maybe that one thing is Googling how to build intimacy in my marriage and simply intentionally doing some things off of that list. Maybe it's beginning to be cognizant of your defensiveness or excuses or validation during arguments. Maybe it's asking what they need to feel appreciated. Maybe it's asking one thing that you can do to consistently help them that would make them feel prioritized. Do you have any idea the positive impact that would have on your marriage? Most of you will never find out because most people aren't actually interested in a great marriage. Because that requires things from you, like selflessness and humility and consideration. And we've forgotten that good people can still make bad spouses. But I'm here to remind you, learning about feelings and closeness and connection and healthy conflict resolution isn't weakness, it's strength. Being overwhelmed with your spouse's feelings and dismissing them as unimportant, that's weakness. And it takes a real man to ask his wife, have you ever not been vulnerable with me because of how I've treated you in the past? Few men ask that question, and few men reap the rewards of a wife that feels close to them and safe with them. So start by doing one thing this week, even if it's just one apology. I started with this one. I'm so sorry for all the ways I've hurt or neglected you and didn't even realize it. I'm sorry that you didn't feel safe with me to bring that to my attention. Is that true of you? Are you sorry if you've hurt them unintentionally? Then say it. Because just like unexpressed appreciation, an unexpressed apology will just be interpreted as apathy or entitlement. You don't have to let that happen in your marriage. Few marriages end when both people are prioritizing selflessness and empathy and vulnerability and intimacy. Millions die to a lack of those things. Heck, most people won't even look up what those actually are or how to practice them in their marriage. So let's practice them. Let's learn what love requires of us, things like appreciation and affection towards one another. Let's learn what any marriage needs to survive and thrive, things like consideration and empathy and vulnerability and intimacy. Those aren't add-ons. They're not take them or leave them. They're pillars of what makes a marriage strong or weak. So let's build a strong marriage because the storms are coming, and how you handle them determines which side of the 50% you're going to be on. This isn't about perfection, it's about direction and intentionality. Which way is your marriage heading? Because it's heading in a direction whether you're aware of it or not. And I know where apathy and avoidance and busyness and laziness lead. Do you? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.